I'm Daniel Marsh, licensed funeral director and embalmer at Thornhill Funeral Home in Savannah, Georgia. Or at least I was before I submitted my letter last month, ending 17 years in a profession I once considered my calling. I hold dual certifications from the American Board of Funeral Service Education and completed my mortuary science degree at Gupton Jones College of Funeral Service back in 2008. Over nearly 2 decades, I've worked with more than 3,000 families, prepared over 1,500 bodies for viewing, and handled everything from peaceful passing to nightmarish mass casualty situations during the Interstate 95 pileup in 2019. I thought I'd seen the full spectrum of what death could show a person. I was wrong, catastrophically wrong. In this profession, you become intimate with death in ways most people can't fathom. Bodies in every imaginable state of decomposition and trauma. Families shattered by sudden loss, their grief manifesting as rage, denial, or hollow-eyed shock. I've dealt with hoarder homes where we had to dig the deceased out from under mountains of rotting garbage, suicides requiring hours of painstaking reconstructive work, and drowning victims so severely bloated they looked like grotesque parodies of human beings. I once prepared a man who'd been decomposing in his apartment for 6 weeks during a scorching heat wave. The smell was so overpowering that 3 of my most experienced colleagues vomited repeatedly in the preparation room. None of that shattered me. I understood the science behind tissue breakdown, the psychology driving human grief responses, and the technical procedures required to restore dignity to even the most damaged remains. But what I'm about to tell you is the one case that obliterated everything I thought I understood about death itself, and ultimately drove me to walk away from the only career I'd ever known. It wasn't the gore or the heartbreak that destroyed me. It was the fundamental impossibility of what I witnessed. The way the laws of biology, chemistry, and physics seemed to simply stop applying to one particular subject. The way reality itself appeared to malfunction in her presence. And the worst part? I have documentation, photographs with timestamps, witness statements from colleagues whose professional reputations are absolutely beyond reproach. Physical evidence that proves what happened, even though what happened violates every principle of mortuary science and human physiology. The case came to us on Thursday, October 12th, 2023, at approximately 2:45 in the afternoon. I remember the exact time because I was updating our scheduling software when my assistant director, Rebecca Chen, knocked on my office door. Rebecca had been with Thornhill Funeral Home for 9 years and was one of the most level-headed professionals I'd ever worked with. She never got rattled, but when she stepped into my office that afternoon, her face was unusually pale. "We just received a transfer from Memorial Health University Medical Center," she said, glancing at the tablet in her hands. "Female, age 28, name is Sarah Whitmore. Cardiac arrest, pronounced dead at 11:32 this morning. Family wants a viewing, service scheduled for Monday." Nothing unusual there. We received hospital transfers multiple times per week. "What's the family situation?" I asked, already pulling up our intake forms. "Parents are local, father's a high school principal, mother's a nurse at the same hospital where she died. No siblings. They're absolutely devastated, as you'd expect. She was apparently healthy, no history of heart problems, just collapsed at work." I nodded, making notes. Sudden cardiac death in young, seemingly healthy individuals was tragic, but not unheard of. "When are they coming in for arrangements?" "Tomorrow morning at 10. But Daniel, there's something else." Rebecca hesitated, which was unlike her. "The hospital staff who released the body to us were acting strange. The transport coordinator, this woman named Linda, who I've worked with dozens of times, she seemed almost relieved to have the body off their premises. She kept saying how the case had everyone on edge." "Did she specify why?" "Not directly, just said there were some unusual circumstances surrounding the death. I figured she meant the suddenness of it, young woman and all that. I filed that detail away but didn't think much of it at the time. Hospital staff could be dramatic about unexpected deaths, especially when the deceased was young. All right, let's get her checked in and into refrigeration. I'll do the initial evaluation before the family arrives tomorrow." Rebecca nodded and left. I finished my paperwork and headed down to our receiving area about 20 minutes later, around 3:10 in the afternoon. The body bag was already on the transport gurney, and our intake coordinator, Michael Torres, was completing the chain of custody documentation. Michael had been in the funeral industry for 12 years and treated every case with the same methodical professionalism. "Everything looked correct on the paperwork?" I asked. "Yeah, all matches up. Sarah Elizabeth Whitmore, date of birth April 3rd, 1995, pronounced dead at 11:32 a.m. Cause of death listed as sudden cardiac arrest. Hospital release signed by Dr. Patricia Valdez at 1:15 this afternoon." He looked up from his clipboard. "You want me to help you get her situated?" "No, I've got it. You can head back to the front." After Michael left, I wheeled the gurney into our preparation room. Thornhill had one of the better equipped facilities in Savannah. Our prep room was spacious, immaculately clean, with stainless steel tables, proper ventilation systems, and every tool and chemical needed for modern embalming procedures. I'd performed countless evaluations and preparations in this room. It was my domain, where science and skill transformed the deceased into peaceful versions of themselves for final viewings. I pulled on nitrile gloves and unzipped the black vinyl body bag. Sarah Whitmore looked like she was sleeping. Her face was peaceful, almost serene. She had dark brown hair that fell just past her shoulders, pale skin with a light dusting of freckles across her nose, and delicate features. She was wearing what appeared to be business casual clothing, a cream-colored blouse and gray slacks. Someone at the hospital had closed her eyes and her hands were folded across her stomach. What struck me immediately was how normal she looked. Most bodies that come to us from hospitals show obvious signs of medical intervention: 4 punctures, intubation trauma, defibrillator burns, the waxy pallor that sets in within hours of death. Sarah had none of that. Her skin still had a faint warmth of color to it, though I knew that was likely just the lighting. I touched her arm gently to assess rigor mortis. Her skin was cool but not cold. That made sense. She'd only been dead for about 4 hours at that point. But there was something else, something I couldn't quite identify. The texture felt wrong somehow, not in an obvious way, just slightly off in a manner I couldn't articulate. I checked my watch, 3:17 p.m. I made a note to document the time and began my standard initial examination. I checked for any obvious trauma or signs of disease. Nothing. Her fingernails were clean, well-maintained, no cyanosis. I gently manipulated her jaw and found minimal rigor mortis, which was appropriate for the time elapsed since death. Then I checked her eyes. Standard procedure when preparing a body is to ensure the eyes are properly closed and, if necessary, use eye caps to maintain the natural shape of the eye socket. I lifted her right eyelid to assess the condition. Her eye was partially open beneath the lid, and it was looking directly at me. I jerked my hand back instinctively, my heart hammering. Then I forced myself to breathe and think rationally. Bodies sometimes had partially open eyes. It was a common occurrence. The muscles relax after death, and eyelids don't always stay completely closed without intervention. I'd seen it hundreds of times, but something about the way her eye had been positioned, the angle of it, had created this unsettling illusion that she was looking at me. Just a trick of the light in my own tired mind. I steadied myself and checked again, more carefully this time. Her eye was indeed partially open, the iris visible, a light gray-blue color. I positioned her eyelid closed again and made a mental note to use eye caps during the actual preparation. Then I checked the left eye. Also partially open, I closed it as well. I continued my examination, checking for any signs of tissue breakdown or discoloration that might complicate the viewing. Everything seemed normal. Her body showed no signs of the typical decomposition process that begins immediately after death. No skin slippage, no bloating, no discoloration. She could have died minutes ago rather than hours. I took several photographs for our records, standard practice for every case. Then I carefully transferred her from the gurney to one of our refrigeration units. We kept our morgue refrigerators at a steady 38 degrees Fahrenheit to slow decomposition. I slid her into Unit 3, closed the heavy door, and logged everything in our tracking system. The whole examination had taken maybe 20 minutes. Nothing unusual except for that strange moment with her eyes, which I'd already rationalized away as a common post-mortem phenomenon combined with my own fatigue. I stripped off my gloves, washed my hands thoroughly, and headed back upstairs to finish my administrative work for the day. I had 2 other services to coordinate for the weekend and needed to confirm flower arrangements with our suppliers. The rest of Thursday passed without incident. I left the funeral home around 6:30 that evening, went home to my apartment in the historic district, heated up leftover pasta, and watched television until I fell asleep on my couch around 10. Completely normal, completely routine. Friday morning, I arrived at Thornhill at 8:45, giving myself time to review Sarah Whitmore's case file before meeting with her parents at 10. Rebecca had already prepared our arrangement conference room, setting out tissue boxes, water, and the various catalogs and pricing sheets we use to help families make decisions about caskets, urns, flowers, and service options. I decided to do a quick check on Sarah's body before the parents arrived. Standard practice. I wanted to assess whether any additional work would be needed for the viewing, give the family realistic expectations about timing and appearance. I headed down to the preparation room and opened refrigeration unit 3. Sarah Whitmore was exactly as I'd left her. Same position, same peaceful expression, same cream-colored blouse. Except her eyes were open. Not partially open like yesterday, fully open, both of them, staring straight up at the ceiling of the refrigerator unit. I felt ice water dump into my stomach. I absolutely knew, that I'd closed her eyes yesterday. I checked them both, positioned the lids, noted it in my examination. There was no question in my mind. But eyes don't just open after death. Not like this. Not both of them. Not fully. Muscle relaxation can cause eyelids to drift open slightly over time, especially if they haven't been secured with eye caps yet. But this was different. Her eyes were wide open, as if she'd deliberately opened them. I stood there for a solid 30 seconds, just staring, trying to process what I was seeing. Then I reached in and gently closed her eyes again, this time being extra careful to ensure the lids were properly positioned. Her skin was colder now, as expected after a night in refrigeration, and rigor mortis had progressed significantly. Her jaw was locked, her limbs stiff. I made a mental note to use eye caps during embalming, which I'd be starting this afternoon after the family meeting. Then I closed the refrigerator unit and tried to shake off the unsettled feeling creeping up my spine. The meeting with Sarah's parents, Robert and Michelle Whitmore, was as heartbreaking as expected. Robert was a tall man in his mid-50s with graying hair and red-rimmed eyes that suggested he'd been crying for hours. Michelle, a petite woman with Sarah's same delicate features, could barely speak without breaking down. They sat in our conference room holding hands, occasionally squeezing each other's fingers, as if trying to anchor themselves to reality. "We don't understand how this happened," Robert said, his voice hollow. "Sarah was healthy. She ran marathons. She didn't smoke, barely drank. She was supposed to outlive us by decades." "The doctors said it was a genetic heart condition," Michelle added, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. "Something that never showed symptoms. She just collapsed at her desk at the architecture firm where she worked. Her co-worker found her. They tried to resuscitate her, but she couldn't finish the sentence. I guided them through the necessary decisions with as much compassion as I could muster. They chose a beautiful cherrywood casket, selected photos for a memory board, and scheduled the viewing for Sunday evening with the funeral service on Monday morning at 11. They wanted an open casket, wanted one last chance to see their daughter, to say goodbye properly. "Will she look peaceful?" Michelle asked, her voice breaking. "Will she look like herself?" "I'll take very good care of her," I promised. "She'll look peaceful." After they left around 11:30, I returned to the preparation room to begin the embalming process. This was the most critical part of my job, the scientific and artistic procedure that would preserve Sarah's body and restore a lifelike appearance for the viewing. I opened refrigeration unit 3 again. Her eyes were open, both of them, staring directly at the door, staring directly at me. "What the hell?" I muttered, my hands starting to shake. This wasn't possible. I'd closed them less than 2 hours ago. I'd been careful. I'd made sure. I stood there, my mind racing through possible explanations. Maybe the cold temperature of the refrigerator was causing some kind of muscle contraction. Maybe there was still some residual neural activity. Both explanations were absurd. Neural activity ceases within minutes of cardiac death, and cold temperatures don't cause dead muscles to contract in this manner. But I was grasping for anything rational. I closed her eyes again, this time pressing the lids down firmly and holding them for several seconds. Then I immediately began the embalming process. I'd get those eye caps in place and end this unsettling phenomenon once and for all. I transferred Sarah's body to the embalming table and began my work. I made the standard incision to access the right common carotid artery and internal jugular vein. The incision site showed no bleeding, as expected. No heartbeat means no blood pressure. I inserted the arterial tube and connected it to our embalming machine, which would pump embalming fluid throughout her vascular system while simultaneously draining blood from the jugular vein. I started the machine and watched as the formaldehyde-based embalming fluid began flowing into her arterial system. This was always the moment of truth. You could see the fluid distribution, watch for any blockages or difficulties. In Sarah's case, the fluid flowed smoothly. I could see her skin beginning to firm up slightly, taking on the preserved quality that would allow for the viewing. Everything was proceeding normally, and then Sarah's fingers moved. Not a twitch, not a spasm, a deliberate movement. Her right hand, which had been resting flat on the table, slowly curled into a loose fist. I stumbled backward, knocking into the instrument tray behind me. Scalpels and forceps clattered to the floor. My heart was slamming against my ribs so hard I thought I might pass out. "No," I whispered. "No, no, no." I stood frozen, watching her hand. It didn't move again. Just remained in that partially closed position, fingers gently curled. Dead bodies don't move like that. They don't. Muscles can twitch as rigor mortis sets in or releases. Gas buildup can cause sudden movements. But deliberate, slow, controlled movement? Impossible. Physiologically impossible. I forced myself to approach the table again. The embalming machine was still running, still pumping fluid through her system. I checked the arterial tube connection. Secure. I checked the drainage. Normal bloody fluid, exactly as expected. Everything was proceeding by the book, except for her hand and her eyes, which were open again. And this time, they were looking at me. Not staring blankly upward, actually tracking me as I moved around the table. I felt something fundamental break inside my mind. This violated everything I knew about death, about biology, about the physical laws governing human bodies. You can't have conscious eye movement without brain activity. You can't have brain activity without oxygen. You can't have oxygen circulation without a functioning cardiovascular system. Sarah Whitmore had been dead for over 24 hours. Her heart wasn't beating. Her blood wasn't circulating except for the artificial flow I was creating with the embalming machine. Her brain had been deprived of oxygen for a full day, and yet her eyes were following me. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands and took a photo. I needed documentation. I needed proof that I wasn't losing my mind. The timestamp read 11:53 a.m., Friday, October 13th. "I need help in here," I called out, my voice cracking. "Rebecca! Michael! I need someone in here right now." Rebecca appeared in the doorway within seconds. "What's wrong?" "Look at her eyes," I said, pointing at Sarah. "Tell me what you see." Rebecca approached the table cautiously, her professional mask in place. She looked at Sarah's face for a long moment. Then her expression changed. The color drained from her cheeks. "Her eyes are open," she said slowly. "And they're... Daniel, are they moving?" "Yes," I said, relief flooding through me that I wasn't hallucinating. "They're tracking. Watch." I moved from one side of the table to the other. Sarah's eyes followed me, smoothly, deliberately, the same way living eyes track movement. "That's not possible," Rebecca whispered. "She's been dead for over a day. You've already started the embalming process. There's formaldehyde in her system. Her brain should be..." "I know what her brain should be," I snapped, then immediately felt guilty for my tone. "I'm sorry. I know this doesn't make sense. But you see it too, right? I'm not crazy." "You're not crazy. I see it." Rebecca pulled out her own phone and took several photos. We need to document everything. Have you checked for a pulse? I know that sounds insane, but I pressed my fingers against Sarah's carotid artery, the same artery where I'd inserted the embalming tube. Nothing. No pulse. The only flow was the artificial pressure from the embalming machine. Nothing, I confirmed. No heartbeat, no pulse, no respiration. By every medical definition, she's dead. Has been dead since yesterday morning. Then what the hell is this? Rebecca asked, her voice rising slightly. I had no answer. We stood there together, watching Sarah Whitmore's eyes track our movements, watching her fingers remain curled in that unnatural fist, while formaldehyde pumped through her veins and her body temperature remained at refrigerator cold. Michael knocked on the doorframe. Everything okay? I heard shouting. Come here, Rebecca said. Tell us what you see. Michael approached, looked at Sarah, and immediately took a step back. Jesus Christ. Are her eyes supposed to be doing that? No, I said flatly. They're not. We stood there, all three of us, professional funeral service providers with decades of combined experience, watching something that couldn't be happening. We need to call someone, Michael said. A doctor? The medical examiner? I don't even know who you call for something like this. Call and tell them what? I asked. That a dead body's eyes are moving? They'll think we're pranking them or having mass delusions. And besides, what can they do? She's legally dead. She has a death certificate signed by a physician. Her parents have already made arrangements. We can't just continue the embalming like nothing's happening, Rebecca said. I don't even know what this is, but it's not normal. I looked at the embalming machine. The fluid reservoir was half empty. I'd need to either continue the process or stop it now, but stopping midway would compromise the preservation and make a viewing impossible. Let me finish the embalming, I heard myself say. Document everything. Take photos, videos, notes. If something changes, if anything gets worse, we stop immediately. But right now, we have a family expecting to view their daughter on Sunday. Unless something medically dangerous is happening, we continue. It was the wrong decision. I know that now. But in that moment, my professional training took over. I had a job to do, a family depending on me. And I convinced myself that whatever was happening, it was some bizarre neurological phenomenon that would resolve itself once the embalming was complete. Rebecca and Michael stayed with me for the rest of the procedure. We worked in near silence, only speaking to confirm measurements or hand off instruments. The entire time, Sarah's eyes remained open, tracking us. Her hands stayed curled, but nothing else moved, no other impossible gestures. I completed the arterial embalming, then performed the cavity embalming, using a trocar to remove fluids from her internal organs and replace them with cavity fluid. Her body responded exactly as a dead body should. No resistance, no reactions, just the mechanical process of preservation. When I finally inserted the eye caps, small plastic cups that fit under the eyelids to maintain proper eye shape, and closed her eyes for what I hoped would be the final time, I felt an overwhelming sense of relief. Whatever had been happening, whatever neurological glitch or bizarre phenomenon had been causing those movements, it was over now. The eye caps would keep her eyes securely closed. We cleaned up, documented everything in our case file, and logged the completion of embalming at 2:37 p.m. I'd been working on Sarah for over 2.5 hours, and I felt exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with physical labor. What do we do with the photos and documentation? Rebecca asked as we stood in my office. Keep them, I said. Store them with the case file. If anyone ever questions anything about this case, we have evidence of what we observed, but we don't share them externally. Not unless something else happens. And if something else does happen, Michael asked. I didn't have an answer for that. I sent them both home early and told them to take the rest of Friday off. They'd earned it. I stayed at the funeral home until almost 7 p.m., catching up on paperwork and trying to convince myself that everything was fine now. The embalming was complete. Sarah was properly preserved. Her viewing would proceed as planned on Sunday. I was wrong. Saturday morning, I came in at 9 a.m. to handle some administrative tasks and prepare for a service scheduled for that afternoon. An elderly man who died peacefully in his sleep, completely routine. I wasn't planning to check on Sarah. The embalming was done. She'd be in refrigeration until Sunday afternoon when we dress her, apply cosmetics, and place her in the casket. But as I passed by the preparation room, I heard something. A sound. Soft. Rhythmic. Almost like breathing. I stood outside the closed door, every rational part of my brain screaming at me to walk away, to ignore it, to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But my hand was already reaching for the door handle. I opened the door and stepped inside. The sound was coming from refrigeration unit 3. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 or 30 seconds. The sound continued, soft, steady, definitely coming from inside that refrigeration unit. I walked across the room and put my hand on the handle. Then I pulled it open. Sarah Whitmore was lying exactly as I'd left her yesterday afternoon. Eyes closed with eye caps in place. Body dressed in the simple gown we used for embalmed bodies awaiting their final clothing. Hands folded across her chest. And she was breathing. Not gasping, not struggling, just breathing. Slowly, steadily. Her chest rising and falling with perfect rhythm. I slammed the refrigeration door shut and backed away until I hit the far wall. My mind was fracturing. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real. Dead bodies don't breathe. Embalmed bodies don't breathe. Bodies filled with formaldehyde and cavity fluid don't breathe. I pulled out my phone and called Rebecca. "Daniel, I'm at home. Is everything—" "Get to the funeral home right now," I said, cutting her off. "Bring Michael if you can reach him. And Rebecca, when you get here, I need you to look at something and tell me I'm not insane." She must have heard something in my voice because she didn't ask questions. "We'll be there in 20 minutes. I waited in my office, door closed, trying to control my breathing, trying to think rationally. There had to be an explanation, a scientific explanation. Maybe some kind of gas buildup in the body cavity that was creating the illusion of breathing? Maybe the refrigeration unit's ventilation system was creating an optical effect? But I'd heard it, that soft, unmistakable sound of respiration. Rebecca and Michael arrived 18 minutes later. I met them at the front door and led them directly to the preparation room without explanation. "I need you to listen," I said, pointing at refrigeration unit 3. They stood silent. After a moment, Michael's eyes widened. Is something breathing in there?" "Open it," Rebecca said quietly. I pulled open the door. Sarah Whitmore was still breathing, chest rising and falling, slowly, peacefully, like someone in a deep, comfortable sleep. "Oh my God," Michael whispered. "How is this possible?" "It's not possible," I said. "That's the point. This can't be happening." Rebecca reached out with a shaking hand and touched Sarah's neck, checking for a pulse. She held her fingers there for a long moment. "Nothing," she said. "No pulse, no heartbeat. Her skin is cold. She's exhibiting every sign of death except she's breathing," Michael finished. We stood there, 3 trained professionals, watching a corpse breathe. "We have to call someone," Rebecca said. "This is beyond anything we can handle. I don't even know what this is. Medical miracle? Nightmare? We need doctors. She has a death certificate," I said slowly, my mind working through the implications. "She was pronounced dead by a physician at Memorial Health. They did tests, EKG, EEG, everything. She met all the criteria for death. If we call someone now, if we tell them she's somehow alive, do you have any idea what kind of investigation that triggers? The hospital, the attending physician, all of us will be under scrutiny for medical malpractice, improper death declaration, God knows what else." "So what do you suggest?" Michael asked. "Just close the door and hope this resolves itself?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I honestly don't know." We made a decision that afternoon that I'll regret for the rest of my life. We decided to wait, to monitor Sarah, to see if the breathing stopped, if the phenomenon resolved itself. We documented everything with photos and videos. We checked on her every hour, and we prayed that by Sunday she'd return to being simply dead. Saturday evening, around 7 p.m., the breathing stopped. We'd been taking turns checking on her, and Michael was the one who discovered it. He called me and Rebecca back to the preparation room, and we confirmed that her chest was no longer rising and falling. Whatever impossible thing had been happening had ceased. "Maybe that's it," Rebecca said hopefully. Maybe it's over now. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Sunday afternoon, we prepared Sarah for viewing. Rebecca handled the cosmetology, applying makeup with expert skill to give Sarah a peaceful, natural appearance. Michael and I dressed her in the clothing her parents had provided, a simple blue dress that her mother said was Sarah's favorite. We placed her in the cherrywood casket her parents had selected and arranged her hands in a natural position. She looked beautiful, peaceful, exactly like what grieving parents needed to see. The viewing was scheduled from 5 to 8 p.m. Robert and Michelle Whitmore arrived at 4:30, wanting a private moment with their daughter before other mourners began arriving. I led them into our main viewing room, where Sarah lay in her casket surrounded by flowers. Michelle immediately broke down, rushing to her daughter's side and grasping her hand. "She looks so peaceful," Robert said, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for taking such good care of her." I stood respectfully in the background while they said their goodbyes. Other family members began arriving around 5:15. By 6 p.m., the viewing room was full of people. Friends, co-workers, extended family. Everyone crying, sharing memories, trying to process the loss of someone so young. At 6:37 p.m., I was standing near the back of the viewing room, watching over the proceedings as I always did, when I noticed something. Sarah's hand had moved. It had been folded across her other hand when we'd placed her in the casket. Now it was lying flat against her stomach. I felt ice water flood my veins. I moved closer, trying to be discreet, trying not to alarm the mourners. Maybe I'd been mistaken about how we'd positioned her hands. Maybe someone had touched her and accidentally moved them. Then her fingers curled, slowly, deliberately. The same motion I'd witnessed on Friday during the embalming. I looked around frantically. No one else seemed to have noticed. They were all focused on sharing memories, comforting each other, too lost in their own grief to observe the impossible thing happening right in front of them. I caught Rebecca's eye across the room. She'd seen it too. Her face had gone chalk white. I made a split-second decision. I walked to the front of the room and quietly announced that we needed to close the casket for a moment to make a minor adjustment to Sarah's positioning. It was highly irregular, but the mourners were too grief-stricken to question it. Michael helped me close the casket lid. We wheeled it into our adjacent preparation room while Rebecca stayed with the guests, offering apologies and reassurance. Once we were alone, I opened the casket lid. Sarah's eyes were open, and she sat up, not slowly, not gradually. She just sat straight up, her body moving with fluid, natural motion. Her eyes focused on my face, and her mouth opened. "Why won't you let me leave?" she asked. Her voice was quiet, hoarse, but unmistakably human, unmistakably aware. Michael made a choking sound and stumbled backward. I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing and hearing. "Sarah," I whispered. "I've been trying to leave," she said, looking down at her hands, flexing her fingers. "But I'm trapped. Why am I trapped here?" You died," I said, feeling insane even as I spoke the words. "Your heart stopped. You were pronounced dead. You've been dead for 3 days." She looked at me with those gray-blue eyes, and I saw something ancient and confused in them. Something that didn't quite match the young woman whose body she inhabited. "I know," she said. "I felt myself die. I felt myself leave, but then I was pulled back, and now I can't leave again. Something's holding me here." "The embalming," Michael whispered from across the room. "Oh God, Daniel, the formaldehyde. What if we trapped her somehow? What if by preserving the body we—" He couldn't finish the thought. Neither could I. Sarah looked at Michael, then back at me. "Please," she said. "I'm so tired. I just want to rest. I want to go where I'm supposed to go, but I can't, not while I'm held here." "I don't know how to help you," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I don't understand what's happening. This isn't possible. You're not supposed to be conscious," she finished. "Aware? I shouldn't be, but I am, and it's agony. Please, please help me leave." We stood there in that terrible moment, and I realized that my profession, my understanding of death, my entire worldview had been shattered. I'd spent 17 years helping families say goodbye to their loved ones. believing I understood the process, the science, the finality of death. I understood nothing. Rebecca opened the door. "Daniel, the family is asking..." She stopped, seeing Sarah sitting upright in the casket. "Oh my God! We need to end the viewing," I said, my voice mechanical. "Right now. Tell them there's been a complication, a medical situation. Whatever you need to say, clear the room." Rebecca nodded and disappeared. I looked at Sarah, this young woman who should have been at peace, who should have moved on to wherever we go after death, but instead was trapped in a preserved corpse, conscious and suffering. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I'm so sorry." She lay back down, and her eyes closed. When I checked for breathing, there was none. When I checked for a pulse, there was nothing. But I knew she was still in there, still trapped, still aware. We couldn't complete the viewing. We told the family that Sarah's body had shown signs of unexpected decomposition and that we needed to close the casket immediately for health and safety reasons. They were devastated but understanding. The funeral service the next morning would be closed casket. That night, I sat in my office and wrote my letter of resignation. I couldn't continue in this profession. Not after knowing what I'd done, not after understanding that death might not be the peaceful transition I'd always believed it to be. Michael left the funeral industry entirely. He now works in retail selling furniture. Rebecca transferred to another funeral home in Atlanta, but she calls me sometimes late at night, and I can hear the doubt in her voice, the uncertainty, the question that haunts us both. How many others? How many of the bodies we've embalmed, preserved, and buried were actually conscious, trapped, unable to leave, suffering in silent awareness while their families mourned and moved on? Sarah Whitmore was buried on Monday, October 16th, 2023, in a closed casket. Her parents never knew what happened in that viewing room. They never knew their daughter sat up and spoke to me. They buried her believing she was at peace. I hope they're right. I hope that whatever was keeping her trapped in that preserved body finally released her when we laid her in the ground. But I don't know. I'll never know. And that uncertainty is what drove me out of the profession. What keeps me awake most nights. What makes me question every assumption I ever held about death, consciousness, and what it means to truly let someone go. I've tried to research similar cases. I've scoured medical journals, reached out to other funeral directors, looked for any documentation of post-mortem awareness or consciousness. I've found nothing concrete, a few anecdotal stories, some unverified accounts, but nothing that explains what I witnessed. The photos and videos we took are stored on an encrypted drive that I keep in a safety deposit box. Evidence of something impossible. Proof of a reality that defies everything we think we understand about life and death.